Well, now we're going to move to the area of mental health, and it does seem that more and more people in Ireland are talking about it, with lots of initiatives and organisations using the slogan, "It's okay not to be okay." In just a few moments, I'm going to be speaking to Professor Kevin Malone about the ongoing problem with suicide here in Ireland. But first, one Dublin housewife has written a play called Lean on Me. It deals with mental health, and it's proven to be such a success with local audiences that it's been picked up by a professional theatre company. Our reporter Aisling Riordan met the cast at rehearsals for the latest run.
I just feel like everyone thinks I'm this blundering mess. I don't go out anymore.
5 people with 5 different stories and 1 group counsellor. It certainly makes an interesting mix. The play Lean on Me deals with mental health issues, but if you think that sounds a bit heavy for a night's entertainment, it's anything but. There are lots of funny moments. Lorna is a busy mum to 3 children, but likes to write in her spare time. She decided to write this play from her own family experience.
My dad was diagnosed with depression about 4 years ago. And I just felt so helpless, and I also had a close family member who's suffered with mental health issues all over the years since I was about 12, and several suicide attempts. So something that's in my family. But I felt, as I said, I felt very, very helpless. So I decided to educate myself a little bit more about mental health, and I went to workshops and read up about it, Googled it, and tried to just educate myself as much as possible. And then I was fascinated by the group therapy concept. I thought it was like amazing the way you have a facilitator there, but it's basically the people that are supporting each other and helping each other. So I thought it'd be a really, really good idea for a play.
Earlier this year, Lorna put the play on herself in the Civic Theatre in Tallaght, and it got such a great response, a professional theatre company has taken it on board.
I'm Jerry Herbert. I'm co-artistic director of Causeway Productions. My partner is Geraldine McComish, and we're involved in putting on a professional production of Lean on Me, Lorna's play.
Why did you decide to take it on?
I suppose the same reason that Lorna got involved in writing it. There are people in her family who have been involved in mental health issues. We lost Geraldine's nephew to suicide. And I fully identify with the feeling of helplessness that was in the script when I read it, and it's quite traumatic reading it actually. And the one thing I want to stress about it though is that even though it's about a very, very serious topic, nobody's going to come to the theatre to be preached at. So it is an engaging and interesting play. But when we read the script, we said, yeah, we have to do something about this. It's really worth doing.
Mammy wouldn't let me talk to Jimmy.
Sorry, breather, what's that?
Jimmy, he worked in Superquinn, but Mammy wouldn't let me talk to him. She said I acted like a silly schoolgirl and always make me show myself.
Lean on Me opens tonight in the Sean O'Casey Theatre in East Wall in Dublin and runs until the 7th of September.
And that report was from Aisling Riordan. Well, I'm joined now by Professor Kevin Malone from St Vincent's Hospital. Kevin, thanks very much for coming in to us again this morning. Can I ask you, first of all, you know, you've worked obviously in the field of psychiatry for many years at this point. Plays like this, a public dialogue around the issues of mental health and indeed suicide, does it help?
Well, I think we all acknowledge that there still is a large stigma associated with mental illness and indeed with suicide in Ireland. So any platform that gives a sensitive portrayal or a new understanding or a modern understanding of people with mental illness as opposed to mental illness, and it seems that this play is about people with mental illness, and I think that's where we've got to move to in our understanding of mental illness, and indeed similarly reflecting on suicide. It's a modern tragedy. It's affecting young people to an excessive degree and disproportionate to many countries in Europe. So we have to be willing to learn more about it. And even in your clip there, you could see that one of the actors, wasn't just talking about it. She'd gone and she'd read up about it. She'd learned to educate herself. And I think we need to be on a pathway to educating ourselves about these modern problems, mental illness and suicide in our young people.
And yet, at times, you hear the arguments that you shouldn't report on it, you shouldn't talk about it. When people hear about suicide or too many details about it, there are copycat suicides.
Well, I think the role of the media and how effective or influential the media is in regard to suicide in any particular community is very interesting, and I think we've got to do research around it to understand how and if the media can influence suicide rates. There's a discussion as to whether it does or doesn't, but I think sensitive portrayal is important. I think education is important. I think, you know, including the media as part of suicide prevention rather than them being on the outside and them being, you know, good or bad. I think including them is going to be an important factor in education.
So certainly not to ignore it.
The opposite. I think we've got to embrace the media and how the media can help with regard to this problem.
And can I ask you, I mean, Kevin, what are the figures currently with suicide in Ireland? I mean, there seems to be an ongoing problem, particularly with youth suicide, when we compare ourselves to places like the UK, which are normally very similar to us.
Well, I think that's you know, if you're looking at similar communities with kind of similar lifestyles, similar values, you'd expect broadly similar suicide rates. Yet the UK, particularly with regard to youth suicide rates, is about 5 per 100,000, and here it's about 14 per 100,000 for our youth.
So it's almost nearly
three times the rate of youth suicide in Ireland compared with the UK. So so that is. Well, we've got a lot of problems. We certainly were very behind with regard to stigma around mental illness. Our development of response teams to people in suicidal crisis is still very diffuse, and I suppose it just kind of snuck up on us in a way and has been there, but has been something that people haven't wanted to address. There was a suicide prevention strategy put in place. It was kind of across all the communities in a kind of spread probably too thin, as opposed to focusing on the real problem. And the real problem is that we are losing our young people to suicide at levels that we were never expecting. We used to teach the medical students that as a general practitioner you would probably see 1 suicide death every 3 years. Now most GPs will tell you that they're probably seeing between 3 and 5 suicide deaths a year, and some GPs in some communities are seeing up to 10 suicide deaths a year. Which is very scary. I also should point out that even though those numbers they are frightening, it is rare. It is a rare problem across the country, but it's all too common in certain communities, in certain situations, and it's all too common for families who've been bereaved by suicide.
And I know, Kevin, in the past you've spoken about the kind of the bullying nature of Irish society. Do you think that is part of the problem, or is a fundamental cause for this high rate of youth suicide?
Well, certainly our research study, you know, there was a strong.
This is you did a longitudinal suicide in Ireland 2003 to 2008 study there.
There was a strong message particularly among some youth suicide deaths, that there was an element of bullying that couldn't be considered benign, and you couldn't just ignore it because it appeared in several different guises in several cases. So how young people deal with being bullied, and I think I mean, it's, if you like, almost strategic bullying. These are cases where really young people are really being picked on in a way that really shouldn't be happening, and not just by their peers indeed, but by people in the community and people that should know better, you would think. So overall, I think we are lax with regard to bullies in Ireland, and you know, I mean, I wouldn't be the first person to say that. And if the example in Ireland is that bullies get away with it, and I think there's plenty of examples in Ireland that bullies get away with it, well, then we've got a problem compared with other societies within Europe that have a very different approach, and bullying is just not tolerated. No.
And Kevin, the other thing I know you've spoken about in the past is the idea that Ireland itself is almost a suicide cluster. Talk to me about that. How could that be the case, or how would that be the case?
Well, I suppose if you're just an impartial researcher looking in from the outside, and you have a map of the concentration of suicide deaths in European countries, and particularly focusing on young people, you'd have to wonder what is going on in this little island off the western tip of Europe, which is different to mainland Europe with regard to suicide rates. And you would say, well, that certainly looks like, on a macro level, that looks like a cluster.
Where people are learning to commit suicide from what's going on.
Almost suicide begets suicide within the community, and there's a great degree of helplessness, there's a great degree of grief, unresolved grief, anger, loss, and I suppose an interpretation of suicide as a potential solution. which
a normalisation.
Which definitely doesn't help society.
Okay, well listen, Professor Kevin Malone, thanks very much indeed for coming in to us, and it is World Suicide Prevention Day next week, so we'll be coming back to this topic then. Thank you.